Welcome to session 10. The following session, Avoid the Fashionable but False, an introduction to logical fallacies for all ages, will be presented by CCLE Board Secretary, Reverend Paul Cain. Please welcome Reverend Cain.
Thank you. Let's talk about logical fallacies. During a recent school year, I was blessed with time to teach introductory logic through logical fallacies and a primer on rhetoric as the art of communication for 3rd through 5th graders and 6th through 8th graders at Martin Luther Grammar School and Emmanuel Academy. Handouts were one sheet of paper, front and back, with color art, a lesson, and questions for homework. Regarding this session, I had always wanted to attend a session at a CCLE conference where a teacher presented a lesson, shared information about class discussion and homework, and placed that lesson in the context of the whole course. If you would like my student handouts, please send me an email, revpaulcain@gmail.com. Here's my attempt at another practical session like that. I did another last year presenting on rhetoric. It's available on the CCLE YouTube channel as Humanizing Humans, Applied Rhetoric for the Art of Communication. So let's walk through the parts of my lessons on logical fallacies. To keep us on time today, I've removed some review information and homework questions that were originally provided to students. Week 1. What is a logical fallacy? Logic, the study of formal and material logic, focusing on deductive reasoning and the forms of propositions, as well as the study of informal and logical fallacies and how to identify and refute them. The definition is from Adopting Classical Education, a guide for educators. Formal logic is a study of how conclusions follow from statements called premises. A major premise, a minor premise, and their conclusion together are called a syllogism. A simple example can help with comprehension. If A, then B. If B, then C. Therefore, if A, then C. It is imperative that both B terms be equivalent. Otherwise, you end up with the following. Cold rice is better than nothing. Nothing is better than a good steak. Therefore, cold rice is better than a good steak. That makes no sense, especially since I live in Wyoming. The first B is shorthand for nothing at all. The second B is shorthand for nothing in the world, in my opinion. Those B terms are not equivalent. A syllogism must be valid before it can be true. There are exceptions to this, but they are rare and usually involve Jesus in the one-year historic lectionary readings for the month of January. There are 256 different possible setups of a syllogism. Only 24 out of the 256 have been proven valid. The rest are used by politicians and people who say, trust the science. The kids laughed at the same spots. Informal logic is the home of informal fallacies, critical thinking, and argumentation. It examines arguments expressed in more everyday, natural language. A logical fallacy is a statement that is flawed thinking, yet actually may sound convincing at first or for the long term. Upon further reflection, we will eventually discover that the conclusion is not supported. People may use a logical fallacy unintentionally because they don't know any better, or on purpose, intentionally, purposely to deceive and persuade others by lying. There are countless examples of logical fallacies. They're best understood according to common characteristics, organized into two main categories, formal and informal. Informal fallacies have something wrong with their context or content. Formal logic uses structured formal language, as we read above. Formal fallacies have something wrong that can be identified by studying their structure. We will spend the first 15 minutes of each session, that was an hour long, discussing a specific type of logical fallacy or broader type of logical fallacy. The students would read, odd-numbered pages are for your handouts and notes. Even-numbered pages are your homework. We flip the page. Homework for week 1. What is a logical fallacy? You don't have to answer these questions aloud. You can keep your answers to yourself, just as if you were filling out an Iowa or a Stanford test bubble. What are the two main divisions of logic? Glenn Welch has been a creative source on the internet for teaching logical fallacies using pictures featuring football referees. I reproduced one here. We have an ad hominem attack, personal foul, attack the opponent instead of his argument. If ad hominem means to the man or person, how would you explain this kind of logical fallacy to someone who's never heard of logical fallacies? Is the personal attack logical fallacy a formal or informal? Why would someone ever use a logical fallacy on purpose? Using the language of Luther's Small Catechism, what commandment or commandments are broken by using a logical fallacy on purpose? Why do logical fallacies appear to be true? There's a lot in week 1. Week 2, the personal attack, ad hominem logical fallacy. This fallacy is called a personal attack in English. It's an informal fallacy. They have something wrong with their context or content. Not only is this a kind of informal logical fallacy, it is a specific version of a very common kind, a red herring. We'll cover more red herring fallacies later in our time together. For now, know this. A red herring is a figurative expression referring to a logical fallacy in which a clue or piece of information is or is intended to be misleading or distracting from the actual question. For example, to you, on the original handout, I put a picture of a herring, a small fish, in red. Presenting a picture of a fish in red, specifically a herring, was a distraction, so the red herring was a red herring. Here's where we are, students, in the study of logic, from the broadest category to the most specific category. Logic, informal logical fallacies, avoiding the question fallacies, red herring fallacies, personal attack. You are here. Homework. What are the two main divisions of logic? Let's remind ourselves. Why did I repeat the question? Even with the handout, so many students didn't get it right the first week. Circle one answer below. A personal attack logical fallacy is an informal or a formal logical fallacy. Fill in the blank. The personal attack logical fallacy is part of a more generic type. There's the blank. When someone wants to avoid talking about the real important issue, they can use a logical fallacy to avoid talking about it, distracting us with something else. Color this picture of a herring red. It's okay to have a sense of humor. How might a candidate running for office use the personal attack logical fallacy? Remember, this kind of fallacy is by nature disrespectful, and we are not to tell lies about our neighbor, betray him, slander him, or hurt his reputation, but defend him, speak well of him, and explain everything in the kindest way. I'm still used to the worldview version of the 1943 Catechism, put the best construction on everything. Informal homework during the week off from school. Watch and listen for logical fallacies in what you watch, listen to, and read. Be observant. Week 3, actions of distraction. We've been living in the land of informal logic while examining the red herring kind of logical fallacies. Personal attack logical fallacies are a good example of a red herring. Like a dog distracted by a squirrel, sometimes people want to distract you from learning the truth about something or noticing significant details. Or out of bad habits, they will use this kind of logical fallacy to keep an ugly argument going. You will find personal attacks in political campaigns, legislatures of cities, counties, states, and nations, and in academic circles. If someone realizes that he will lose an argument based on the facts, he may try to avoid blame by changing the subject or using a red herring to get you to forget about his guilt, error, or scandal. There are other red herrings. Appeal to the bandwagon, popular opinion. Appeal to fear, misusing emotion as manipulation. Argument from consequences, backwards thinking. Guilt by association, who you know or who knows you. Straw man, an artificially easy and inaccurate argument. Genetic fallacies, the appeal to irrelevant authority, and the personal attack. There's also appeal to hypocrisy, morality on a sliding scale. We will discuss these other kinds of logical fallacies soon. Why? We want you to understand what they are and how they work so you can identify them in everyday life and not be distracted or led astray by any of them. In last week's homework, I asked you to color red a black and white picture of a herring. That was a distraction. And not everybody followed directions. Homework for week 3. Why are squirrels distracting to dogs? Why would someone want to distract you from their words or actions? Name the 3 types of the red herring fallacy from this week's handout on the front of the same piece of paper. Did you notice anyone using a logical fallacy during your week off from school? Using the language of Luther's Small Catechism, what specific commandments are broken by using a logical fallacy on purpose? Yeah, I repeated that question too. Week 4, appeal to hypocrisy. Today's logical fallacy is a subtype of the personal attack. It's an appeal to hypocrisy. In brief, this kind of personal attack is not that far removed from an inappropriate taunt from the playgrounds of the world. I know you are, but what am I? It's an appeal to someone else's bad behavior as a way of seeming to justify one's own bad behavior. For Christians, this doesn't work. God doesn't grade on a scale. He judges by the 10 Commandments. He forgives us in Christ because Christ Jesus perfectly kept the commandments in our place. This kind of personal attack, the appeal to hypocrisy, usually comes off as petty, vindictive, and just plain mean. Parents, don't go for it. It does not convince teachers. There's some of the secret sauce the kids need to know, right? The pastors know better than to fall for it. It's passive-aggressive behavior. A hypocrite is someone who falsely pretends to have virtue and or piety. They are infamous for judging others, for exemplifying, do what I say, not what I do. But they are seen as unfair and give others similar to them, yet not hypocritical, a bad reputation. Remember, all informal fallacies have something wrong with their context or content. Worksheet. Define the word hypocrite. Why would someone want to be judged by someone else's bad behavior? As a Christian, is it appropriate to attempt to justify your bad behavior, sin, by pointing to someone else's? Why or why not? What is the Christian solution to the problem in the question above? Week 5, the bandwagon fallacy. Another kind of red herring, otherwise known as the appeal to the people. This logical fallacy is used to sell you stuff. It's all over advertising. You will hear things like, the cool kids are all doing it. You don't want to be left out. Marketers use a technique called fear of missing out, FOMO. What does that look like? You click on a link for something that interests you, and they will start a timer for 15 minutes, pressuring you to make a decision soon. Say you purchase the item. We've all been there. You will then be faced with upselling, where the company will present you with another limited time offer for an additional product. They make money when they sell you more. Ads are often unrealistic. They often make promises they cannot keep. Homework. What is another name for the bandwagon fallacy? Use a dictionary to define the word lemming. Please note, I did not say AI or Google. Watch for ads that try to sell you things using this logical fallacy, and give me an example. Why do ads use this logical fallacy on purpose? Week 6, appeal to irrelevant authority. Among the red herring fallacies are those where the information provided can be safely ignored because of its origin, its source. These are called genetic fallacies. In other words, genes are bad. The two genetic fallacies are appeal to a relevant authority, someone who isn't a subject matter expert on the topic at hand, and the personal attack. Irrelevant means not relevant. What is said has little to do with what we're talking about at the moment. Here's an example. My computer tech says that most technology works better if you turn it off and then turn it on back again. He said that probably would help my car run better. Unless your computer repair guy is also an expert mechanic, don't necessarily take his advice on car repair. It's possible for someone to be an expert in more than one subject area. Teachers often are. Headmasters certainly should be. And many people have hobbies they enjoy to work and learn at in addition to their regular job. Some pastors like variety of hobbies like music, hunting, fishing, hiking, travel, sports, and very specific parts of theology. It does often matter who says something in addition to what is said. In our internet age, people often assert expertise on any issue in the news or culture. It doesn't necessarily mean that what they say is true, accurate, or worth listening to. Especially social media, right? Homework. Consider the following information and answer the questions that follow. I'm a doctor, and I like using this product. I've used it for years. It works for me. It will work for you. If the speaker was a medical doctor, would that cause you to trust him or her more or less? Why? If the speaker had a doctorate, an academic degree in a subject other than medicine, like geology or astronomy, would that cause you to trust him or her more or less on the product? Why? Define the word irrelevant here. Which commandment covers authority figures? How are we given to treat those in authority, even when we suspect they are incorrect on a matter? Week 7, the straw man. What is this? Distorting or misrepresenting someone's argument in order to make it easier to defeat. Distorting means to alter, to give a false or unnatural picture or account, or to twist out of a natural, normal, original shape or condition. Misrepresenting means to give a false or misleading representation of something, usually with an intent to deceive or be unfair. Neither distorting nor representing are truthful, fair, or good. Sometimes the straw man is used on purpose to deceive. Sometimes it's used on accident, usually when a speaker or writer is trying to simplify a subject too much. In either case, the hearers who believe an argument with a straw man fallacy are not well prepared to deal with the actual argument or position and may end up falling for it. The so-called defense can actually fail miserably. Why is this fallacy called a straw man? Think of a scarecrow. It's human clothing filled with straw. It's not real. It's a simulation of the real thing in order to scare away crows. A man made out of straw can't stand up on his own. It cannot fight back. Homework. What is the straw man fallacy? What does it mean to misrepresent? What does it mean to distort? What commandments are broken by using a straw man fallacy on purpose? Week 8. Guilt by association. Another red herring. This logical fallacy pronounces someone or some group guilty because of a connection to another person or group. It's a logical fallacy of distraction, avoiding the question. Those fallacies are faulty thinking because they distract those involved from some important matter by bringing up something supposedly bad or scandalous. This fallacy works by alleging that a person or group shares ideas with a person or group that is supposedly bad. The idea is to make that person or group seem bad or worse than before because of that connection. The commandment to not bear false witness really takes a beating with this logical fallacy. The person or group in question may have some connection, but usually doesn't share in every bad opinion or characteristic of the other person or other group. This one's used a lot in academia, but thrives in politics. Homework. The guilt by association fallacy is unfair. How is it unfair to the person or group being attacked? Define the word association. Please use a dictionary outside of our Thursday class time. I had to say it this way from this point forward because some students were making up definitions while I was still talking instead of looking at a dictionary. Why would someone ever use this logical fallacy on purpose? What would they be trying to gain? How is this logical fallacy a sin against the commandment to not bear false witness? Week 9. Argument from consequences. Another red herring. An argument from consequences fallacy, also called an appeal to consequences, happens when someone argues that their belief is true or false based on the consequences that will follow if the belief is accepted. This is not clear thinking and is often a manipulation of emotions. This logical fallacy is more commonly used than it is understood. The fallacy works by focusing on one possible outcome as the only way. How many 1980s cartoons had that phrase coming out of a G.I. Joe? You may have heard this on a cartoon, sitcom, or movie. Such thinking is blind to other possibilities, either because of ignorance or in order to manipulate someone on purpose. The commandment about bearing false testimony is violated by this one. If you don't use this product, you won't lose weight. If you don't go to the right university, you'll never have a good paying career. If you go vote for that candidate, the nation will go to hell in a handbasket. I don't know why it's a handbasket every time. Homework. Consider the examples in the last paragraph on the front page. Pick one of them. How can you logically prove one of those statements false? Here's a fourth example and how to refute it. If you don't wear your lucky hat, your team will lose. Christians don't believe in superstitions because we trust in the Lord. There's no such thing as luck. My personal actions don't directly impact the action on the field or court. The players, coaches, and referees have a direct influence on the game. The team will win or lose based on the points scored, not on a fan's fanaticism. Define the word consequence. Please use a dictionary outside of our class time. Week 10. Appeal to fear. Emotional appeal. An appeal to fear imagines an unpleasant or scary future if you don't do what the person using this logical fallacy recommends. Why do they play on your emotions? They don't want you to think. They want you to be afraid instead. This fallacy is used in political campaigns, advertising for products, and in some relationships when someone inappropriately wants to guilt you into doing something. Watch for when people use emotion only and do not give you evidence or facts to back up their fear-mongering. This is related to the slippery slope. A TV commercial showing someone breaking into your car. If you don't keep the noise down in this classroom, the headmaster will hear and come himself to punish you. The other candidate for governor promises amnesty, so that will lead to more crime. Homework. Define the word fear. Answers definitely varied on that. How are facts and evidence a threat to this fallacy? Give your own example of this kind of fallacy. Give it some time and thought. Week 11. Appeal to ignorance. Today's logical fallacy is not another kind of red herring. An appeal to ignorance fallacy, or argument from ignorance, says that a proposition is true because it has not yet been proven false, or that a proposition is false because it has not yet been proven true. This one was identified by John Locke in the late 17th century. It works by playing on what people may not or do not know. Your ignorance is their power. No news is good news. Simply because you do not have evidence that something exists does not mean that you have evidence that it doesn't exist. Homework. Define the word ignorance. Who identified this fallacy and when? Which commandments are broken by its use? Week 12. Hasty generalization, also known as the black swan. It's an informal logical fallacy like our recent one. It's also called a black swan. What does that mean? In the prologue of the book, The Black Swan, Nassim Nicholas Taleb writes, before the discovery of Australia, people in the Old World were convinced that all swans were white, an unassailable belief as it seemed completely confirmed by empirical evidence. The sighting of the first black swan might have been an interesting surprise for a few ornithologists and others extremely concerned with the coloring of birds, but that is not where the significance of the story lies. It illustrates a severe limitation to our learning from observations or experience and the fragility of our knowledge. One single observation can invalidate a general statement derived from millennia of confirmatory sightings of millions of white swans. All you need is one single, and I am told quite ugly, black bird. What's going on here? People are presuming, assuming, making a premature conclusion on the basis of incomplete evidence. Here are some examples. If the first 10 people that you see at our school are children, would you conclude that no adults are present? That would be a hasty generalization. Hasty generalization usually follows a pattern. X is true for A. X is true for B. Therefore, X is true for C, D, E, and so on. Homework. What is another name for the hasty generalization fallacy? What color do we usually think of when we picture a swan? Why were black swans such a surprise? Is being ignorant a good thing or a bad thing? Why? How does seeking more information prevent this logical fallacy? Week 13, circular reasoning. What does this mean? This fallacy assumes as true the very thing the fallacious statement is trying to prove is true. You go around in circles. Instead of new evidence, the claim is repeated in different words. Very common, often used by people by mistake. It may often be used by those who have fourth commandment authority over us when they are frustrated. Because I told you so, anybody? In those cases, don't point out this fallacy. Respect authority when you can keep Acts 5:29, we must obey God rather than men. It's time for you to go to bed. Why? It's past your bedtime. Fossils of this type are found in this type of rock. How old is this rock? This rock is dated by the kind of fossils that are found in it. A is true because B is true. B is true because A is true, obviously. Homework. Why is circular reasoning unhelpful to use? Which commandments are in tension with this logical fallacy and why? Bonus teaching. Doing the right thing can get you into trouble. Yet we echo and practice Acts 5:29, we must obey God rather than men. When the state commands that which God forbids, or forbids what God commands, we have the duty to obey God rather than men. The Lutherans of Magdeburg made the good confession in 1550 against the emperor. When any authority commands that which God forbids, or forbids that which God commands, the lower authority or lesser magistrate has a duty to disobey the unjust command of the higher authority and, if necessary, to actively resist. In addition, those who hold lawful authority must wield it in whatever capacity they have to oppose tyrannical decrees. No one can give you permission to sin against God's word. No one can give you permission to break the 10 Commandments. No one can command you to sin against your conscience. We must obey God rather than men. Like Luther, our consciences are captive to the word of God. On a side note, I got my first copy of the Magdeburg Confession at the 2013 LCMS convention. It wasn't an official booth. What I figured out after the fact was that some Calvinists had come to our convention in St. Louis, hawking copies, walking through the hallways during breaks when people were using the restroom, 2 for $20, and I got 2. And I so much prefer Dr. Christian Preuss's translation. It's much more accurate to the Latin. Week 14, false dilemma, either or, bifurcation. A false dilemma happens when your choices are artificially and unfairly limited. 5 options may be available, for example, but you are only given 2. This fallacy should not be confused with a parent or authority figure, limiting choices to an unruly child to get them to begin behaving properly. See, teachers, moms and dads, I got your back. This logical fallacy is used in politics, especially in the USA, and other places with 2-party political systems. Limiting choices makes a situation appear to be a binary choice, black and white, on and off, good and evil, red and blue. There are true situations when there are only two choices. Most times there are shades of gray between the black and the white. If you're against war, then you don't support our military. It's possible to be for the troops and against a particular war. We can be for missions or for pure doctrine. False. You can have both. Young America's dilemma. Shall I be wise and great or rich and powerful? An actual poster from 1901. Homework. Define the word bifurcation. What questions could you ask to avoid falling for this fallacy? Write 2 incomplete sentences. Yeah, I finally had to go there. Say we had more than 2 major candidates for President of the United States. In your opinion, how would that change elections? What would be the impact on the Electoral College? If you don't know what the Electoral College is, ask Pastor Cain, a teacher or a parent. Week 15. Composition and division. Today's logical fallacy is actually 2 closely related logical fallacies, the fallacy of composition and the fallacy of division. What does that mean? The fallacy of composition looks like this. Y is part of X. Y has property A. Therefore, X also has property A. This does not necessarily follow. Just because a bird is covered with feathers and a feather is light, a bird is not necessarily light in weight. It may or may not be true. We cannot assume that parts or members of a whole will have all of the same properties as the whole. The fallacy of division looks like this. Some parts of X have the property A. Y is part of X. Therefore, Y also has property A. Here's an example. People in Wyoming go hunting. Jim lives in Wyoming. Therefore, Jim must go hunting. That does not necessarily follow. It may or may not be true. We cannot assume that a characteristic that applies to a whole or a group must always apply to the parts or to individual members of the group. These logical fallacies show up in personal conversation and everyday life. People make false assumptions based on incomplete information. Don't we call that the rumor mill? You can see how these fallacies are related to one another and to other informal fallacies. The commandment to not bear false testimony is again broken. Homework for week 15. The picture on the other side showed a Venn diagram. What is a Venn diagram? Please use a dictionary or reference book outside of our Thursday class time. How would a Venn diagram be helpful when thinking about composition and division fallacies? You've studied a lot of logical fallacies so far. What one commandment is commonly broken by nearly all logical fallacies? We've made it to week 16. Not a cause for a cause. The casual fallacy. A false cause is a logical fallacy that assumes one event or phenomenon causes another event or phenomenon based only on coincidence or correlation. The picture had a symbol on the page for the teaching. It looked like an equal sign with a diagonal through it, meaning does not equal. So here are some examples of this fallacy. The rooster crowing causes the sun to rise. Yeah, ridiculous. This logical fallacy is extremely common in sports, gambling, sometimes called gaming, unfortunately, and among non-Christians. This fallacy is very much connected to violations of the first commandment and idolatry. There's a lot of superstition I found with this one, and there's a tangential connection with the commandment, "You shall not steal." People often assume that there's a cause and effect relationship between two events merely because one event follows another. That's not always the case, but sometimes it is, because there's a desire to find a simple explanation to every very complex situation. Since we're getting close to a time where I'd like to take some questions and be a little more interactive, let me tell you about the remaining weeks and then try to sum up. We did slippery slope for week 17, a fallacy that claims one course of action will lead to a chain reaction, resulting in bad things, or an undesirable outcome. It can be true, but sometimes it's fear-mongering. Week 18 is equivocation, calling for two different things by the same name. Dogs make great pets. Wolves are big dogs. Therefore, wolves make great pets. All men are created equal. Women are not men, so all women are not created equal. Rocks are natural. Natural foods are good for you. Eating rocks is good for you. Did you finish your homework? I worked on it. But is it finished? Week 19, no true Scotsman. Here's an example. Communism kills people. But true communism has never been tried. Yeah, it's not worth the risk. Watch for an appeal to purity. No Scotsman puts sugar on his porridge, but my Uncle Angus is a Scotsman and he puts sugar on his porridge. Well, no true Scotsman puts sugar on his porridge. And week 20, continuum. This is a broader category that includes the slippery slope. Here are some examples. And I apologize in advance to anybody with this name. Bonnie has a full head of hair. If you pull one out, she will not be bald. If you pull another out, she will still not be bald. Therefore, no matter how many hairs you pull out, poor Bonnie will not be bald. If a pile of sand has a grain of sand removed one at a time, when does it stop being a pile and is a smaller collection of grains of sand? So how did all of this work out with 3rd through 8th graders? Like with the introduction to rhetoric that I presented last year, my goal here was to meet grades 3 through 8 somewhere in the middle. And we were blessed with scholars who largely could handle, even in 3rd grade, a 7th grade reading level. My goal was to lay a foundation that could be built upon later in junior high, high school, and college. There were more sessions on logical fallacies than an introduction to rhetoric because I got to take time to prepare scholars for speech meets. K through 8 local speech meet and one with our sister school up in Billings, Montana. My purpose with the questions were aimed to get students to actually notice things on the actual handout, to get them into a dictionary, open the book and actually find the words and copy them down, to listen and pay attention to mini lectures, and to get them to connect new knowledge to old. I also wanted them to think and apply new knowledge in an age-appropriate way. I had thought of adding sessions on affirming the consequent, one on survivorship bias and overconfidence, and possibly some newer fallacies mentioned by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. I'd always wanted to attend a session at a CCLE conference where a teacher would present a lesson, tell us about the homework, and then answer questions in real time about how all of this worked. going forward, I think it would be interesting to find correlations between logical fallacies that we have in classical ed and cognitive biases. Consider, both of them produce irrational or unreliable connections. Both are extremely popular and common in politics, advertising, social media, science denial, investing, and relationships. They often feed each other. Cognitive bias, an in-group bias, frequently causes someone to commit a logical fallacy. No true Scotsman, no confessional Lutheran. Awareness of either logical fallacies and cognitive biases can improve critical thinking, decision-making, and persuasion. But there are challenges. While you can destroy a logical fallacy by rewriting the argument correctly, you cannot destroy a cognitive bias in the same way. You have to work around or mitigate the mental shortcut. 2, fallacies are rule-based. There are formal tests, but biases are statistical tendencies observed across large groups of people. And 3, it's easier to spot fallacies in other people's arguments than your own. Biases are hardest to spot in yourself. That's what we call the blind spot. Let's stop here and take some questions. What are you curious about? How have you done this in your classrooms? And if you haven't, how can we help you to do that? Please.
So I was focusing on the hasty generalization. And within the hasty generalization, it seems that of all the logical fallacies, that's the one we commit most of our incompletion of, because we base our thoughts, our statements on what we know.
Yes.
When I got to this conference, I was thought, all right, the drinks here are coffee or water. And that was my pure thought until lunch the next day when I saw, oh wait, there's tea, there's pop, there's all this stuff here. And so at what point does it stop being a hasty generalization and start being just a lack of received knowledge?
That's a really good question. A lot of us really have blinders on like a racehorse. And it's nice to have a teacher come alongside any of us, a subject matter expert, somebody who knows the lay of the land of whatever subject it is better, and just get their take on things. But that requires more than a little humility, because we've been trained by social media that we need to fix the world. Why are you still up? Well, there's somebody wrong on the internet. And you can't fix all of those problems. Sometimes we are listening in order to find a way to answer instead of listening in order to comprehend the other person and their argument. I guess that's why I do a communication section on fighting fair during premarital counseling, or marital counseling as it is. Can each person be quiet and focused on the other long enough to actually hear what the person is saying, then patiently restate what the other person said in their own words, and then be undefensive long enough to get the feedback of, here's what you got right, here's what you got wrong, here's what I intended to say. So I think it just takes some patience and less of a knee-jerk reaction to, oh, I didn't find the answer to the question right away. I don't understand. So you raise your hand like a second grader and says, teacher, I don't get it. Help me right now. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you.
Cool, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. So in coming up, how many times have you taught this course?
Just the once.
Okay, so when you put the course together, where did you get logical fallacies for each week, and how did you know how to construct them together, right? I'd like to know how you, where did it come from? Because I'm not aware of any list of logical fallacies.
That's a wonderful question. So I realized when I went to my first CCLE, number 5, 2003, Laramie, Wyoming, there may have been 2 or 3 dozen of us there, I didn't know what this stuff was. So I started reading through the Veritas Press catalog over the next 7 years to prepare myself in case a divine call came to a school and a church with a school like Sheridan, Wyoming. And over the course of that study, I realized my weak points were beyond grammar in logic, dialectic, and rhetoric. So I started focusing especially on logic, and I collected a lot of books as soon as January 2009 came along. And by the time I was installed at Sheridan, I had a little bit of a bookshelf. And we spent after school once a week for my first 2 years at Sheridan studying introductory and intermediate logic using Canon Press materials. Well, I noticed there were gaps in this one textbook's version of logical fallacies and the fallacy detective and the other one with a dog on the cover. You know what I'm talking about, some of you. So I began a collection, and I've got a variety of different books, and I didn't want to just go with one. I wanted to improve on every book that I had, because there wasn't a Lutheran one just yet. So I took a little bit here and I took a little bit there, and I figured out a family tree. So that's what I did. We need more Lutheran published stuff. So if I can, by my imperfect presentation, get somebody to help me make it better, thank you, because that's what we want for the next generation anyway. And if I can encourage you to finally share with a peer your own curriculum, we do have a CCLE press. And, Lulu exists too. So that's honestly what I did. I've got a little bit from here, a little bit from there, and then notes all the way through all the books. Yeah. Other thoughts, please?
I have a question sort of about the next step, or maybe I should have asked this last year. With the number of these, but I was thinking the appeal to fear, appeal to emotions, they're logical fallacies, but they're also correct rhetorical technique.
Ah, yes.
So I was wondering how you handle that when you teach it in the rhetoric side of things. I'm curious if this is logically a fallacy, but we should use.
Yes. You end up having a little bit of a moral quandary when you are intentionally using logical fallacies in order to persuade, right? So I'm going to go immediately to Quintilian, the good man speaking well. A few years ago, when we were at Seward, I was talking about Aristotle's 3 appeals, and a commenter called me out appropriately for being a little too harsh on exaggeration, because, our Lord Jesus used hyperbole too. Camel, eye of the needle, all of that fun stuff too. So there's a definite balance, and among native English speakers, there's more of a forgiveness to use certain techniques when everybody knows what you're doing, right? If you're on Instagram and you click the link in the description and you're taken to the sales side of things where you log in with Shopify or shop with the purple button, right? You know what you're getting into. And I just budget for that in my continuing ed. So we can subject ourselves to things that we know aren't quite fair for a purpose. And I think our hearers, our conversation partners, not opponents, our conversation partners will give us some grace in that way too. How about that? I do also want to comment, Wittenberg Academy commissioned a translation of Melanchthon's dialectic textbook that does not cost Rumpelstiltskin prices. You know, European prices from Brill or de Gruyter. You know, the struggle is real in academia and for pastors and seminarians. The thing I love about it is he makes the case for dialectic and rhetoric being taught in tandem, together. So sure, start with basic logic, formal, informal, introductory, intermediate with students when you can, when you think they can handle it. But by the time you're getting into rhetoric, circle back around and remind them of all of the stuff that they learned, logic and dialectic-wise. When it comes to Melanchthon's texts, whether the dialectic text or his 3 in Latin rhetoric textbooks, plus the bonus workbook, so there's 4 out there, but the 3rd one is his most mature thought. Remember that he is not just restating Aristotle, Cicero, Quintilian. So don't just think of Melanchthon as, oh, he's a secondary source when it comes to classical material. Hey, friends, he's a primary source when it comes to Lutheran material and educational material. This is the teacher of the Germans. And what has been missing from our Lutheran classical schools is how Lutherans classically taught and their own textbooks. So we need these in English until we can all just pick up Gerhard's Catholic Confession, the 1,600-page book that's never been translated, and just sit down and read it. Well, that's not realistic. So we need a lot of this in English. He's a primary source, and Melanchthon is so creative, he expands and adds things, just like we do in our classical schools if we would do a keyboarding and we talk about science that's after the Greeks and the Romans. We do this too. Melanchthon is a wonderful example for that. So get his dialectic textbook and watch for a translation of his rhetoric textbook. Thanks, man. Yes?
Have you taken what you put together here and applied it to Christian apologetics and say, Christian apologists are using this argument and this one, but this one's not valid and this one is? Let me give you an example.
Okay.
Back to hasty generalization of black swan. I think I like black swan better because I've sometimes said that the best argument against the resurrection of Christ is what I call common experience. Because you ask 1 million, 2 million, 1 billion people, have you ever seen somebody alive after he was dead?
Right.
And the answer is no, I haven't. Therefore, okay, nobody rises from the dead. However, all it takes is 2 valid witnesses.
Right.
Or 3 or 500. But have you done something like this where you take what apologists use and say, yeah, that's good, that's not good?
No, but that's a wonderful way to expand that, especially with some Lutheran apologetic resources that I'm going to be reading soon. Yeah, that'd be great. That reminds me a lot of some of the things that Craig Parton has in his materials. He's been to Sheridan, Wyoming twice. The Defense Never Rests, and there's a follow-up book, both in their second editions from CPH. Yeah, that'd be great. Defending the Faith. With regard to the resurrection, I say, well, that a person doesn't rise from the dead isn't much of a surprise. But isn't it neat that God wrote a book about the ones that did? With Lazarus, I keep thinking of the poor guy, of the little girl that some people call Talitha, or Talitha, Talitha Kumi, little girl, I say to you, arise, or the son of the widow at Nain. Those poor people had to die a second time. At least with Lazarus, Bethany got known as Lazarusville, unofficially. Did you ever hear that? it was fascinating to me because if you drive across the country to go to a CCLE conference and then go back home, when you take the cruise control off to go through these small towns, it'll usually tell you the town's name, the population, in the west, the elevation, above sea level elevation, and then home of so-and-so famous guy was born here, right? Home of Lazarus. Welcome to Bethany. You know, it's just lovely. Yeah. Peace be with you all.